Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Please subscribe my channel and like for latest news today. We need to talk about something that could significantly change the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war. Belarus's latest announcement, a move that may reshape alliances, logistics, and regional dynamics. What exactly did Belarus announce? Why is this important? And what might come next? Let's dig in. Over recent days, Belarus has put the world on alert by proposing the construction of a new nuclear power plant designed to supply electricity to Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, namely Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk. This announcement is powerful not only for its technical implications, but for its political and strategic symbolism. Lukashenko floated this plan during a meeting with Putin, and Putin appeared to back the idea, arguing that if there is demand for electricity, financing is not an issue. On its face, this looks like an energy infrastructure move, but in the context of war, energy equals control. By offering to supply power to Russian-held territories in Ukraine, Belarus is anchoring itself even more firmly into Moscow's orbit. It is signaling that it is not just a passive supporter, but a partner in the logistical and administrative integration of Russian gains in Ukraine. Let's go deeper. What does this announcement do strategically? First, it helps Russia mitigate one of its persistent wartime problems, the vulnerability of its energy and logistics networks. Ukrainian strikes deep into Russian territory have recently disrupted oil and fuel infrastructure, leading to shortages and pressure points for Kyiv. By having Belarus build a power plant targeted at occupied Ukrainian zones, Russia can rely less on stretching its own grid and pipeline lines, and instead offload some of that burden to a nearby ally. Second, it gives Russia and Belarus additional leverage over Ukraine and international backers. If Russia claims it is investing in development of occupied regions rather than just military control, it can frame these actions as infrastructure aid, complicating the narrative for sanction regimes or international condemnation. That doesn't mean it will succeed, but this is part of a longer strategy to blur the lines between occupation and governance. Third, the move deepens Belarus's own risk and exposure. By stepping more overtly into the conflict's infrastructure, Minsk could become a target for Ukrainian countermeasures, cyber, sabotage, or even direct strikes, especially since these power lines likely cross contested zones. But Belarus is already not far from that edge. Its military was recently placed on its highest combat alert as part of a national readiness check. Lukashenko has ordered certain units to be deployed to designated areas under this readiness program, another front to watch. Belarus earlier held joint strategic exercises with Russia, the Zapad 2025 drills. In those drills, there was reportedly practice involving the Oreshnik missile system, which is nuclear capable, and planning for nuclear weapon deployment exercises. So Belarus is already showing increasing willingness to host advanced Russian systems. This new announcement seems like a natural extension of that direction. Let's connect some dots. Belarus has served as a staging ground for Russian operations since 2022, allowing Russian forces to move troops, missiles, and logistics across Belarusian territory. Now Belarus is signaling it will provide energy infrastructure support behind the lines in Ukraine. This is a deeper level of involvement. One more element. Domestically, Belarus faces internal pressures and limited legitimacy. Lukashenko likely sees these kinds of geopolitical gestures as a way to consolidate his alliance with Moscow, secure continued support, and distract from internal dissent. But the cost is that Belarus becomes more of a wartime asset and less a neutral buffer. So how do the key players react? Ukraine will be alarmed, because Belarus inserting itself into the governance of occupied territories directly undermines Ukrainian sovereignty. Western powers and NATO will view it as further escalation and complicity. Sanctions may intensify, and Russia, though supportive, will have to weigh how much responsibility it shares with Belarus for any fallout, militarily, economically, diplomatically. What options does Ukraine have? It can try cyber attacks or sabotage on the infrastructure or lines of communication. It can lobby allies to impose further sanctions. It can attempt military strikes on vulnerable systems, though that risks escalation and broader conflicts in Belarusian territory. The strategic gamble is whether such attacks would be justified under international law in the context of occupation. From the Belarus side, one question is whether this new power plant plan is entirely serious or in part a bargaining chip. As Putin said, if there is a consumer, financing is no issue. That gives them flexibility. They might delay or even shelve parts depending on domestic, international, or battlefield developments. Another risk for Belarus is that by aligning more closely with Russia's war projects, its own security may be threatened. Belarus might end up bearing the costs of defense, infrastructure repair, and retaliation without the full military capability to defend itself against Ukrainian strikes. Let's imagine possible worst-case sequences. Belarus begins construction of the plant. Ukraine or its allies target parts of it or power lines either via drones, missiles, or sabotage. That opens the door for Belarus to retaliate or call for Russian direct defense. Escalation could cross into Belarusian territory. Meanwhile, the Western Bloc would step in with condemnation and possibly expanded sanctions against Belarusian energy sectors, financial institutions, and individuals involved in abetting Russian occupation. On the flip side, a best-case scenario for Minsk and Moscow is that the plan never fully executes. It remains a provocative statement, a signal to Ukraine and the West, but never physically implemented until geopolitics allow. This gives them flexibility while shifting pressure onto Kyiv and its backers to respond. In summary, Belarus's big announcement is more than about energy. It's an escalation of strategic alignment, a sign of deeper involvement in Russia's war plans, and a calculated risk. It makes Belarus a more active collaborator in the war rather than just a silent partner. For Ukraine, this is a new front in the information, legal, and kinetic battle. For the West, it is a challenge: how to counter this move without triggering broader regional warfare. As the conflict evolves, this development will be something to watch closely. Will Belarus actually build the plant? Will Ukraine try to disrupt it? Will Belarus suffer blowback? And what role will NATO or the EU take if Belarus becomes more deeply enmeshed in the supply chains of Russian-occupied Ukraine? That's all for today's analysis. If you found this explanation useful, please hit like, subscribe, and share so you don't miss what comes next.